Liftoff. Space Shuttle Atlantis.
Hello everybody, welcome back to our next STEMFest session. We're delighted to welcome today Dave Mackay. He's the Chief Pilot for Virgin Galactic. Dave, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
We're delighted to hear from you, and I know you've got a few slides, but for everybody out there who's going to listen to this presentation, please do type your questions in the Q&A so that we can have lots of questions coming through. At the end of Dave's presentation, I'm going to be posing those questions to him. So please don't be shy, type in your questions. And Dave, I'm going to let you share your screen and go ahead and tell us all about your amazing adventures. And I look forward to chatting with you in a few minutes when you finish your presentation.
So yeah, thank you, Susie. I'm Dave Mackay, and I'm Chief Pilot here at Virgin Galactic, and it's a great honor to be able to talk to you all today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Virgin Galactic, who we are, what we do, our vehicles, how they work at a high level, and what the experience is like flying on board. So I've got some video, and hopefully it will all play nicely. The first one is about 2-3 minutes, and then there's a couple of shorter ones later, and I've got a few slides just to explain everything we do. So let's see if we can play the first video. And there's some noise on this one, there's some sound.
5, 3, 2, 1, release, release. Fire, fire.
So all you kids down there, I was once a child with a dream, looking up to the stars. Now I'm an adult in a spaceship, with such a wonderful adult looking down to our beautiful, beautiful Earth. For the next generation of dreamers, if we can do this, just imagine what you can do.
And please return your ships strap in. Approach re-entry. Get back in.
All right, so that was a flight we did just a few weeks ago with Sir Richard Branson on board. So I just thought I'd orientate ourselves here and you. So we have back in the UK. We've got our communications, brand and marketing team in London. We've got government affairs in Washington, DC. Over on the west coast of the US in California, we have our manufacturing facility and our corporate offices there. But where we're flying from is here in New Mexico, and that's where I'm talking to you today from there. I'm actually in Spaceport America at the moment. And that's the building. I'm sitting in the third floor of that building on the far side as you look at it now. This is we call it the gateway to space, and that's our hangar where we house the vehicles and we get them ready for flight. And it's where the customers come for their training. So let me just take you inside and show you some of what it's like inside. This is our dining room. We've got what we call the barista island here. The coffee there is excellent. And that's our dining room where our customers will eat and where we eat as well. That's the ground floor. On the first floor is our mission control center. Our offices are there too. And then up on the third floor is where the customers are trained, and it's a very special place. Unfortunately, I can't show you that one because it's still top secret. So the customers are trained for over a 3-day period, and then on the day of the flight, they're taken out to spaceship, which is mounted underneath our mothership, Eve. So spaceship is there in the middle. And there it is on takeoff for that flight that you just saw the video of. And so let's just talk a little bit more about the vehicles themselves. So spaceship is there in the middle. I'll talk more about it on the next slide, but the rest of it is what we call our mothership. So we have an air-launched rocket, which is really unusual. So most rockets, as you know, launch from the ground. And there are some advantages to that, but there are also significant advantages to launching a rocket from the air. So we launch from around about 45,000 feet. So at that altitude, we're already above most of the Earth's atmosphere. The air up there is very, very thin, so we can accelerate very quickly. And it means that because there's much less drag up there, we only have to carry a small amount of fuel, a relatively small amount of fuel. If you launch from the ground, you've got to penetrate all that thick air in the lower atmosphere, which creates a lot of drag and takes a lot of energy to penetrate that. We have a mothership, which has got a very high lift wing, a very efficient wing, almost like a glider type wing, and is optimized for getting a large, heavy weight up to very high altitudes. It's unusual in that it's got 2 fuselages. They're split either side of the center of the vehicle, and that allows the spaceship to be mounted at the center of gravity of the mothership, so that when we're flying the mothership with spaceship on board, it actually feels normal. It feels heavier because we've got additional weight, but actually its flying characteristics aren't changed much at all. And importantly, when we release it, it doesn't really disturb the vehicle very much. It loses a lot of its weight. The mothership loses a lot of its weight when it releases spaceship, but it doesn't disturb the aerodynamics and the balance of the aircraft at all, really. It's got 4 engines, 4 very fuel efficient engines. So we launch from around about 45,000 feet, as I've said. And at that altitude, if the motor fails to light, the spaceship motor fails to light, or if it only burns for a few seconds, then it doesn't really matter. Now we're a glider, and that's the way we're going to finish up our flight anyway. Whereas if you launch from the ground with a single-engined rocket, and the motor only burns for a few seconds and then stops, then that could be a bad day, or that can be very challenging to deal with. But for us, we've got wings and we just glide back down and land. So significant advantages to air launching. This spaceship itself, this is actually our latest spaceship, Imagine, it's called. So slightly different color scheme here, if you like. But I'll just point out some of the characteristics. We have up front in the cockpit area, we have 2 pilots for safety. And then immediately behind the pilots, we have up to 6 customers. And they're seated in 3 rows of 2. So each customer has a window seat. So there's no arguing about who has the best view. All the view is the same, the experience is the same, doesn't matter where you're sitting. Each customer is sitting next to a window, and then above their heads, they also have an additional window. And of course, when we're in space, we're allowing our customers to unstrap and float freely around the cabin, and they can go to whichever window they like. Other things to point out, we've got a very swept wing because it's a very high-speed vehicle. It will, at the end of boost, it's traveling at over 3 times the speed of sound, so it's going very, very quickly. So a swept wing is much better suited to those sorts of speeds. We also have a feather system, and I will talk about that a little bit more later on. But for re-entry, we actually fold up the whole rear section of the vehicle. So these booms, there are twin booms here. They're connected by what we call a feather flap. So either side of the trailing edge of the wing, you can just see a thin line there, perhaps being traced by my cursor. That's where it folds upwards, like an upward moving flap. This is all one section that rotates upwards through 60 degrees into a configuration that we call a feather. And that's designed for the re-entry to optimize the re-entry attitude, to slow us down high up in the atmosphere, create a lot of drag high up in the atmosphere. It's a little bit like a badminton shuttlecock. You throw it up in the air and it always comes down in the same orientation. And that's how the feather system works as well. It's like a parachute, if you like, for re-entry. The vehicle is shiny not just because it's pretty, but it also protects against heat. So we're traveling, as I said, at over 3 times speed of sound. At those speeds, the vehicle gets very, very warm. So we've got to protect different parts of the vehicle differently against that very high temperature. And unusually, so this one hasn't actually got the rocket motor fitted in it. This is just a ground shot. But the nozzle would stick out slightly from the rocket motor nozzle would stick out slightly at the rear of the fuselage here. But still, we have some structure aft of the rocket motor plume. And so you can imagine that these parts of the structure get very hot from radiative heating, the heat that you feel around a fire or from the sun. That radiative heat impacts the inside of the booms here. And so this material is mild. It's like a very thin reflective plastic, highly reflective. And so it reflects that radiative heating and keeps the structure at a good temperature. Other things to point out, you'll see it maybe just make out 2 little dots here on the top of the nose, and there are 2 on the side there. This is our reaction control system. So at the end of boost, we're in the vertical and we are doing 3 times speed of sound, and we're essentially outside the atmosphere. And we're on this ballistic flight path. So we're no longer able to maneuver the vehicle using the aerodynamic surfaces, these big surfaces at the rear of the aircraft. But we're on this ballistic flight path, and what we can do is change the orientation of the vehicle. So once we're out of the atmosphere, we can go up backwards, sideways. It doesn't really matter because there's no drag on the vehicle. And we control the attitude of it by these little thrusters. So we duct high pressure air to these little thrusters at the nose. So if I wanted to pitch the nose down in space, then I move a control inside the cockpit, which fires some highly compressed air out of this thruster, and that pitches the nose down. These ones here are for yaw, so moving the nose from side to side. And over on the wingtip here, more difficult to see, there are a couple of roll thrusters as well. We have 2 at each position because we have a primary system and a backup system. Another unusual thing to point out is we don't have a wheel on the nose. We have a skid. And underside the nose there is an area of the vehicle that gets very hot, and so a pneumatic tire there would be a hard environment for a pneumatic tire to deal with. So the skid is very low profile and is not really affected by heat. And another benefit of it is when it comes down on landing and we run along the runway, it creates a little bit of extra drag. So actually acts like a brake on the nose of the aircraft. So it's plywood, but you'll be happy to know it's extremely expensive plywood. So that's probably the main features on this slide. And then, so the profile is, and don't worry about the reading, the writing here, you don't need to read that. So we mount up on the ground, we take off, we climb up to 45,000 feet. So this is supposedly 45,000 feet. We release the spaceship. Once it's released, we fire the rocket motor. It accelerates away. In about 8 seconds, it goes supersonic, and then we pitch it up into the vertical. And we point it straight upwards until the rocket motor shuts down, around about 140,000 feet, about 3 times speed of sound. And shortly after it does so, we're going to allow our customers to unstrap and float around the cabin and enjoy the amazing experience of weightlessness. And when it does that, we will raise the feather and then we'll pitch it over into the inverted position. We believe the inverted position is the best view, and that's what we did for the first time on this last slide. The windows are at the top of the vehicle, and so in the inverted position, you're looking straight down at the surface of the planet. You can see it racing away from you, and you can still use the side windows to look out sideways and see the black sky of space and the beautiful view of the atmosphere around the planet. We'll talk more about that later. So it goes all the way up to apogee in the inverted position, and we start to come down also in the inverted position. But before we meet the atmosphere again for re-entry, then we pitch it around using those RCS, reaction control thrusters I talked about earlier on, into the upright position. And now the feather will keep us there. It's just beautifully balanced. It's literally a hands-off re-entry for the pilot. It's very easy to fly. We come down to 53,000 feet. At 53,000 feet, we lower the feather. And now we're a conventional glider, if you like. We have a lot of excess energy, and we spiral around or do figures of 8 to come back down for a runway landing. So that's the profile, the flight profile. So here's some pictures, really stills from the video that we just looked at earlier on. This is over New Mexico on our last flight. This is a large reservoir called Elephant Butte, which is a reservoir on the Rio Grande River, which basically runs north-south from up in Colorado all the way down into Mexico. And so we're pointing down towards our landing airfield, Spaceport America, which is about 20 miles ahead of us in this picture here. Things to point out of interest, you'll see the nozzle. Here's the rocket motor nozzle here, and it's kind of cut at an angle. We call that scarfing. It's cut at a slight angle, and that actually helps with the pitch up into the vertical and relieves some of the loads on the vehicle. Other interesting things at the trailing edge of the wing here, we've got something called a Gurney Flap, which is kind of counterintuitive, but it's basically an upward, if you like, a dam at the trailing edge of the wing. And it seems counterintuitive because you would have thought you wouldn't want to have anything like that at the trailing edge of a wing, but actually it helps encourage the airflow to remain attached to the wing longer. And so it's used on race cars as well to good effect. And we tried various other fixes, but we eventually came up with this flap, and it works really, really well. Initially, you can see there's lots of little, what look like black dots. Those are holes in the flap. And initially we didn't have those. And there was quite a bit of vibration through the airframe. So much so that my earpieces were vibrating inside my ears. So it was it was unacceptable really for passenger operations. So we knew we had to do something about that. This is much earlier on in the test program. And our very clever engineers worked out that if they drilled holes in this flap, like they have done here, then it would be just as, like 95% as effective as it was without the holes. But the vibration would go away, and they were absolutely right. So they did that, and I was on the first flight with the holes in the Gurney Flap, and all the noise and vibration had gone away. So very smart engineers. Okay, here's the moment of release then. So immediately after release, White Knight, when it's our mothership, when it releases the spaceship, is actually releasing almost half of its all up weight. So it springs upwards at almost 2G, 2 times the force of gravity. So without doing anything in the controls, it springs upwards. And then spaceship, on the other hand, is a little bit below its normal sort of flying speed. So it kind of falls down gently. So it feels a little bit like going over the top of a roller coaster. You get that momentary lightness in your stomach. And then the noise of the four-jet engine on White Knight goes away and you're a glider, but not for very long, because as soon as we know the spaceship is flying properly, we light the rocket motor. There we go, accelerating very dynamically. So the force of the acceleration here with the rocket motor burning is around about 3G, so 3 times your body weight, pushing you from behind. So it's extremely exciting. We've always talked about the weightless experience in space and the views of the Earth from space, and they are an amazing part of this experience, but the rocket ride up there is very, very exhilarating as well. There's a view from the ground at the moment of light up, and it looks like it's very, very close to the mothership. But actually at this point, they're probably separated by around about 300 feet. So they're, because of that pull up from the mothership and the drop down from spaceship, there's about a 300-foot separation at the moment of rocket motor light up. And the view from White Knight, so it pitches up and then it rolls off to the right, and from the mothership itself, you get these fantastic views of a spaceship racing away. It seems this is only a few seconds after launch, and it seems to be going incredibly quickly, incredibly soon after release. And yeah, it's another view from the ground, and it just shows the length of the rocket motor plume. It's significantly longer than the length of the vehicle. So I've got a short video here, which shows that. There's no sound on this one. There's a release, the rocket motor light up, and off we go. It's very exciting initial acceleration. You see a little bit of a pitch bubble there, a little bubble, and that's us going supersonic. And now we're pitching it up into the vertical point, straight up and into space. The rocket motor sounds loud. It's got a very interesting noise, like a kind of howling noise. But it's not as loud as you might think. And I remember the first time that we had someone in the back, it was our chief astronaut instructor evaluating the cabin. And she had several GoPro cameras mounted around the cabin, and she was talking to the cameras, recording her impressions. And during boost, when I'm flying it with the rocket motor burning, I can hear her talking back there. I couldn't quite make out what she was saying. And I'm wearing a helmet and I've got earpieces in as well. So it's noisy, but it's you can still hear people talking over it. So at the end of boost, which lasts about 60 seconds, the motor shuts down. It's a smooth shutdown. It's a smooth light up as well. It's a smooth shutdown. And so you go from this 3G push in the back smoothly to 0G. So at the moment it shuts down, within seconds, we're at 0G, and we clear the customers to unstrap and float around in the cabin. Soon after that, we raise the feather, and this is it coming up, and the vehicle is starting to pitch over into the inverted position. And so that's the inverted position that we believe is the optimum for the view of Earth. So these are the top windows, which are have now become the bottom windows, looking down at planet Earth. And these are the side windows looking outwards into the blackness of space. So it sounds strange, but space is the blackest black I've ever seen, and it's a deep matte black. Very impressive. And by contrast, the surface of the Earth looks strangely bright. And if you think about it, now you're looking directly down at the planet, and you're looking down through the thickest layers of the Earth. Whereas if you're on the planet's surface, or you're on the Earth's surface, and you're looking, you know, on a clear day, you're looking horizontally through the thickest parts of the atmosphere, where most of the dust particles are and water vapor is. But now you're looking directly down through that thick layer. And so the sunlight hits the Earth's surface and reflects back up very, very powerfully. So this amazing range of brightness between this very bright Earth's surface an incredibly dark space. And then separating the two is the atmosphere, and the atmosphere is absolutely beautiful, but worryingly thin. It looks incredibly thin from space, and when you look at it, you realize that very thin band, which is about the same relative thickness as an apple skin around an apple, is what is keeping everyone and everything alive on Earth. So it's a very impressive thing to see. Now, we've all seen pictures like this of Earth from space and the atmosphere, but the human eye picks up this range of brightness much better than any camera can. So it can see this incredibly bright Earth's surface, it can see this incredibly dark space, and it can still make out the fine detail in the atmosphere. And so it's an especially powerful and awe-inspiring sight. You can see so much of the curvature of the Earth that you get a sense of its scale, and you realize planet Earth is not very big. And you're staring out into this blackness of space, and there's nothing else there apart from this incredibly bright sun. You can see nothing else out there. So it kind of accentuates the remoteness of Earth, the scale of the planet, how small it is, how vulnerable we are, how dependent we are on the atmosphere around the planet. So it's a very powerful visual experience. The weightless experience is extraordinary as well. And this is typical that people can't help smiling because it's an infectiously positive experience. And you've probably heard Richard, what he was saying there. It's very, very impressive. So the views combined with the weightless experience are very powerful. So there's no noise inside the cabin. There are no fans recirculating air or anything like that. There's no noise inside the cabin. There's now no motion and there's no sound. You hear the sounds of space if you can be quiet for a moment and stop hooting and hollering. So it's a really quite remarkable experience. There they are enjoying the experience in the back as well as the view. And you can just see Sir Richard Branson there. She was doing an experiment back there with a device called a Kennedy fixation tube, which is fixing biological samples in time in microgravity, just to see if there's a difference between the microgravity experience for those specimens and the gravity experience. So she had 3 tubes which she activated at certain times, carried in this pocket on her leg. But she still managed to do some very good somersaults, actually, which I was very jealous of. And these are the views. So this is from New Mexico. I did a previous space flight in California with the views of the coast, which are also really incredible to see. But the colors in New Mexico are quite remarkable. This is White Sands, and if you've heard of it, that's it's a national monument in New Mexico, and it's very impressive dried up lake bed. And there's Sir Richard looking out the window, just taking in this incredible view. So as I mentioned, we use the reaction control system to get the vehicle back into the upright position for re-entry, so that we're pitching it over here into that upright position. And there's a view again from one of these very powerful Earth-based telescopes of the vehicle in the feather system. So the whole aft part now is pivoted upwards through 60 degrees. And I've got a short video here which shows re-entry. And so this video shot actually begins from the spaceship being a dot, which is really hard to make out, and it just grows. And this is from a flight I did a couple of years ago, and just by coincidence, we're descending almost exactly on top of this powerful ground-based telescope. But it shows, and I didn't know the telescope, exactly where the telescope was, so I can't claim any credit for this. But it just shows how steady it is. You can see some atmospheric effects there where it looks like the whole vehicle is vibrating, and it doesn't really, but you can see how steady it is as it comes down towards the camera. It's interesting in that as you start to come down, you come down from this very silent space, and then the airflow starts to hit the underside of the vehicle, and you start to hear that airflow. But it builds up to a noise which is like a powerful waterfall hitting the underside of the vehicle. It's much louder than boost is. So it kind of emphasizes that you've been to this special place, you've been to space, and now you're re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. And so there's a lot of noise. The vehicle does oscillate a little bit because the airflow is hitting the underside of the floor and then spilling around the wing, just like a parachute, as I mentioned earlier on. But it's very, very stable. It's very easy to fly. You can move the controls forwards and aft, and nothing happens. You can just see us going through a very small amount of cloud there as we come down. Peak deceleration on re-entry is about 100,000 feet. By 80,000 feet, we're subsonic. And what we can do, though, is we can move the controls from side to side. And because of the position of the tailplanes, that actually means that we rotate the vehicle. And that's what's happening right now. I'm actually rotating it to point it towards the landing airfield. So as it comes down into the lower atmosphere, it starts to generate a little bit of forward speed. And ideally, you want to be pointing towards your landing airfield. So that's what I was doing there as a test point earlier on. Okay, and then we get to 53,000 feet, we lower the feather again, and now we're a glider. And this photograph is taken from our chase aircraft, just looking it over to make sure everything is okay after that test flight. And then we come in for a runway landing, just like almost any other airplane, which is a really elegant way to come back to landing. There are lots of information. We are a glider, so we've got to get the landing right every time. We've got lots of ways of assessing our energy and controlling our energy. And here we are coming into land. This was actually taken at Mojave in California. And there's the touchdown at Spaceport America. We've got a little speed brake underneath to control the speed. Then after touchdown, we hold the nose off. That gives us some aerodynamic braking, extra drag to slow us down. Then we lower the nose and bring it to a halt. And then we get towed back in because we're a glider. We don't have any power. We get towed back in, and the customers get off. That's Sir Richard getting off. And we come back to be welcomed by our friends and family and have a celebration. So we have lots of customers lined up. You can see the list of countries on the side there, on the left-hand side. A lot of them from the UK, but really a great selection of countries from all around the world, really. And it's not just flying customers. There's payloads, and we've flown a lot of payloads into space so far. Some of them from universities, some of them from schools. We can do customers only, so people only, or payloads only, or a combination of both. We have human-intended research. We can do astronaut training. So it's a very versatile vehicle. So there's lots of opportunities for flying in our spaceship. All right, that brings me to the end of my presentation. And so, Susie, do we go to Q&A now?
Yes, exactly. I have so many questions for you, and we've had questions coming in as well. I guess if you want to just briefly stop sharing your screen and we can see your face.
Okay, there we go.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think everyone will be most interested to learn a little bit more about the experience of the passengers going up there. And so my first question for you is how long is their microgravity experience as you go over that parabola?
So it's about 3 to 4 minutes or so. So really, as soon as at the end of boost, I'd say that's around about 140,000 feet. As soon as the motor shuts down and everything is nice and stable, that's when we're going to say you're clear to release. Now, they don't have to get out of their seats. They can sit in their seats for the whole experience if they want to. But we recommend you do, because it's such a fantastic experience. And but yes, it's about 3 minutes or so of weightless time.
So it's significantly longer than going in a plane, for example, where maybe perhaps you get 30 seconds in each parabola. You get significant.
Yeah, yes, I've done that, and that is fantastic fun. I did that as part of my training.
Me too.
Great. And I say, you know, I think the biggest problem I had there was I was starting to suffer from cramp in my face from smiling too much. It's tremendous fun, but they're typically around about 25 seconds or so of weightlessness, and it's great fun. If you ever get the opportunity to do it, I thoroughly recommend it.
Yeah, well, I have done it, but what I will say is that after about 12 parabolas, I started to feel a little sick. Now, it could be that I got carried away with my somersaults, or maybe I just get travel sick. But I guess you don't have that issue so much in your flight. Have you looked into perhaps people feeling slightly unwell? Or
yeah, we have. You know, that often gets asked. I personally don't think it will ever be an issue because we just do one very long parabola,
right.
Whereas what you're doing is, you know, 12 or 13. You know, you have your 0G and then you have your high G as the aircraft, you know, pulls out of the dive, pulls up again. So it's that repeated cycling that tends to make people feel nauseous. We don't think that's going to be an issue for us.
Yeah, understood. So you mentioned that it's about 3G that you feel as you go upwards. Help us to understand kind of which dimension of the body is being squashed by this G-force, because it depends on your orientation. So presumably you get squashed into your seat as you go upwards. Is that right? That
is absolutely right. Yeah. So if you imagine sitting in a seat and then being pushed very hard by somebody in the back, that's what it is. That or you're in a very fast car or a very powerful car, and you press the accelerator really hard, and you get pushed back. So it's like that. So, but our light up is smooth, so it doesn't suddenly hit you in the back with a high force. It comes up to full throttle, if you like, over about a second. It doesn't sound very much, but it's not that hard punch in the back.
Right.
But it is very, very dramatic, and there's nothing else like it really on Earth, apart from the very highest power dragsters hit similar sorts of accelerations, or going off an aircraft carrier on a catapult launch. It's a similar sort of acceleration, except ours goes on for 60 seconds. But the seat is designed to hold you. It's like a hand, you know, holding your body nice and steady. And so we accelerate away horizontally initially with this push in the back. And then, as I mentioned, you know, once we go supersonic, then we pitch up into the vertical. So now we're turning a corner into the vertical. And now you feel a little bit of force in this direction too. But because you're also feeling the force in the back, as well as this way, the resultant of the two is a force at about 45 degrees, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
so the feeling in the X direction, obviously front to back, is more manageable than a high G-force sort of head to foot, because your blood is still able to circulate healthily to your brain, right? So
that's absolutely right. Yeah. So in this direction, another way of simulating that, which I've said to people before, if you lie on the ground and put some heavy books on your chest, that's what it feels like.
Yes.
And so you kind of feel that your chest is a little bit compressed, but you can breathe quite happily. And after a few seconds, people don't notice it anymore. But there's nothing you can do to kind of counteract that force. You should just relax. But when the force is coming in this direction, then the fluids inside your body tend to pull down towards the lower parts of your body. And now you can counteract that. And so we teach what's called an anti-G straining maneuver, which is to kind of tensen up your abdomen, the lower legs, and you can strain them against it to stop that pulling off the fluid. So the eyes are very sensitive to blood flow. So the eyes are the organ that would be probably first affected by it. And people talk about graying out or kind of starting to lose their vision. So this is all very temporary, and it's not of any concern. It recovers extremely quickly.
Yes.
But you might find it like a narrowing of the field of view, or maybe some graying out in extreme cases. Again, you know, I think it's such a brief experience for us. It's just like 2 or 3 breaths is what people say in the cabin. We do train for that, and we advise people that you can do this if you want. but it's such a brief experience that most people, it's over before they realize it. And then once we're straight up, then the Z direction, G has gone, and it's now you're on your back, you're pointing straight up. But you still have this force, this acceleration in your back. And then, so, going on to the customer experience side of it, the other remarkable thing about it is that you've launched at high altitude. You're already, at 45,000 feet, you're already above most of the Earth's atmosphere, and the view is, the sky is starting to get a dark blue. As we proceed in boost and we go around the corner, pitch up into vertical, it's amazing how quickly the colors change from blue to very dark blue to black. And now you're looking outside at this black sky, but you're still bathed in sunlight because the sun is still up and it's extremely bright because you're outside the atmosphere. It's not diffused by the atmosphere anymore. So you're bathed in bright sunlight, but you're looking at a black sky, which is a little bit strange initially, but it's a stunning experience.
So you mentioned that your customers do sort of 3 days of training. Tell us a bit about what you advise them to do. Do they do microgravity flights? Do they go in a centrifuge? What kind of things are they familiarizing themselves with before they travel?
Yeah, we encourage them to do a zero-G flight and to go in the centrifuge, and many of our customers have done that. And what we're trying to do in that training process is to explain what's going to happen so that they're not taken aback by the experience. We don't want to spoil the experience. We want it to be good fun, but we don't want it to be a scary experience. So we want to give them some insights into the forces they're going to feel, what zero-G is going to feel like. And we'll talk about things like nausea, and we'll explain that we don't think this is an issue, but look out to the horizon and you'll be fine. But we also talk about, just literally getting in and out of their seats. So it's quite a big deal to get unstrapped from a spaceship on a suborbital flight. And the important thing is to get back into your seat. Now, actually, if you don't get back into your seat, it's probably, you're going to be okay. You can re-enter on the floor, and that's actually going to be okay. But ideally, we want everybody to get back in their seats. So there's a lot of practice there. And we also want to explain the communication system, how that works, and what happens if it doesn't work, or it fails or whatever. And then how to it's a big cabin, and in zero-G, more of it becomes available because now you can float up to the ceiling and you can stand in the ceiling, and that feels perfectly normal. But you need to also consider other people. So there are other people in the cabin that you don't want to. There is a natural instinct for some people to try swimming in zero-G,
Yes.
and it doesn't work.
Yes.
And but what does happen is your arms and legs are thrashing around, and you really don't want to do that with other people close to you. So that kind of thing. And then just to to advise people on what to look for, because there are some amazing things to see, and we want to make sure that everybody captures those special moments. We're one of very few vehicles that actually stops momentarily in space, comes to complete standstill in space. And that's a very special time. There are no forces in your body, there's no movement, you're literally stopped in space for a split second. And so, those are the kind of things that we highlight in training.
Yeah, that moment's really special, of course. And actually, you bring up a good point, which is that they have set, say, 3 minutes of this wetness experience. You don't want any of that to be wasted. They have to be sort of ready and prepared, and so they can enjoy every second. So yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So it's interesting to watch. Every time I watch this, it looks like, and I know this isn't happening, it looks like the rocket kind of plummets when it lets go. It's actually White Knight going vertically, isn't it? So White Knight, as they release, is sort of flying up. The rocket isn't dropping too far before it fires its engines. Is that right? Yeah,
that's right. So you kind of broke up there a little bit, but you're talking about the moment of release.
Yeah, just because it looks like the rocket plummets, but actually white knight is rising rather than the rocket plummeting. Is right.
Exactly. Yeah. So white knight is actually, it will pitch up at close to 2G, so twice its weight, if you like.
Yes.
Because it's releasing about half of its all-up weight at that time, so it springs upwards. Spaceship does descend because it's a little bit below its flying speed, but that's okay. We can do that. So the two vehicles are separating by just over 2G. So we light up the rocket motor pretty quickly in about 3 seconds, but at that point they're about 300 feet separated. They look extremely close when you're looking upwards from a ground-based telescope. It looks like, wow, it's incredibly close, but they're actually quite far apart.
Yeah. And so, okay, yeah, really interesting. So tell me about where you launched from. You're in the middle of the desert. Now, when we see rocket launches, often they're over water. You aren't over water. You're launching always over the desert. And so tell us about kind of how Spaceport came about. Is it just Virgin Galactic that will be able to launch from Spaceport, or do you have the entire complex? Is it yours, or can other people and other things launch from there?
So it's a great complex. It is in a the locals get a little bit upset when I say it's a desert. They call it a semi-arid desert.
Okay.
So, and we've actually had a lot of rain this year, so the desert did turn green. But it's very few people live around there, and that's very common for all rocket launches. You don't want to launch it from the middle of Los Angeles, for example, for obvious reasons. So we do look for a sparsely populated areas. And so Spaceport America was built in this area with the express intention of attracting customers like Virgin Galactic. And Virgin Galactic we were the first company that Spaceport America approached and said, hey, if we build this facility, will you come? And we said, yes, if you build that facility, we will come, because it looked like a fantastic place. The weather here is really, really good. It's well away from any built up areas. And they promised to build this amazing facility. And it is. It's a 12,000 foot long runway, 200 feet wide, with this fantastic, what we call the gateway to space. So we are just customers. There are other customers here as well. And other customers have already operated from here. They have a vertical launch facility as well. So not far away from the runway is a vertical launch pad. And lots of students, actually, and many students from the UK have come out here with their rockets to launch them in a competition called the Spaceport Cup. And I've met a few of them. And this is very much more difficult to do in the UK, to launch a rocket in the UK. Much easier to do in the US. And a lot of these students were just absolutely thrilled to bits to A, have been allowed to come to America, B, having managed to get their rocket through customs. As you can imagine, it's not an easy thing to do, to leave the UK with a rocket.
Yes.
And then finally to be able to come out here and launch it, and and just see what happens. So, but there's also many other customers that come here. So we are a tenant at this fantastic facility.
Wonderful. A question for me, actually, which is looking down from that view. I mean, the view is absolutely incredible. I was just wondering how far you can see, and whether you've ever launched at a time where you might, this would be a night launch, but whether you have ever seen the aurora from where you are. I mean, I can't even imagine what that would look like from the spaceship. Yeah,
so the view is amazing. You can see, several hundred miles in every direction. So for the first space flight, it was interesting. I went up with a colleague, Mike Masucci, and we wanted to recognize places from the ground. So from my side, I was looking at, and I would see Las Vegas, if in the simulator this is, and he would look out and he would see Los Angeles. And on the actual flight, when I looked out the window, I could see so much I couldn't recognize anything. It's like I could see half of America and way up into Canada. It was just an astonishing view. So it is quite remarkable. When you're flying in daytime, because the sun is up and it's so incredibly bright, you can't see anything else in the sky. It's just this deep matte black around the sun. You just can't see anything. We would, at some time in the future, I think it would be fantastic to fly at night, and it's not that hard to do. We will do it eventually, I'm sure. I feel sure about that. And I think the night views would be absolutely remarkable, perhaps particularly in this part of the world where there is very little, you know, there are very few towns or areas of habitation here. So you have a kind of black ground and a, you know, brilliantly lit star fields and aurora, perhaps. You know, I'm not sure we'd see the aurora from where we are in New Mexico. It's maybe a little bit south.
A long way north, but that's why I asked you how far you could see. You know, it would just be wonderful to see that from your vantage point. It would just be incredible.
Maybe we would, yeah. I mean, but it would be incredible, and so that's something that
as far as the Canadian border, it's possible. So that sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm so sad that we're sort of running out of time, but I have a question about payloads. You know, I'm really interested in the fact that you have 30 seconds of microgravity, and we talk a lot about what we can do in science when we have the microgravity environment, and what we can learn about all manner of things, from, you know, pharmaceuticals to materials to the human body. So you have the ability to take payloads. Does that reduce your customer capacity, or can you still take 6 people plus a payload? And what kind of payloads can you take?
Well, obviously we have to assess each payload that people are proposing to put on board for safety. So, you know, and so some of these payloads have had, you know, projectiles shot from one part to the other. Some, you know, one that's coming up pretty soon is actually going to have an ignition source on board, you know, so there's lots of things like that are great, but they need to be carefully controlled.
Yeah.
You know, any release of liquids in you know, how liquids and gases interact in the microgravity environment, is all of those things are really, really interesting. Lots of people want to do that and repeatedly do them, and we have repeated customers. You know, we've flown one customer twice within a short period of time. So all sorts of things are possible, and all sorts of combinations are possible. But obviously, if you have a payload rack, most of those payloads want the purest possible microgravity experience. And what you don't want is people bumping into it, you know, looking at the view out the window. So typically, on this next flight, which is with the Italian Air Force, there are going to be 4 people on board, plus a rack of payloads, and then a lot of the Italians are actually carrying human-mounted payloads. But one of their people is going to get out during the flight and go to the payload rack and initiate the payload, and then leave it. So it's kind of carefully controlled. So there's all sorts of options. You wouldn't typically do your, if I can say, your tourist. You wouldn't want to mix a tourist a cabin with payloads that have to be well protected in microgravity.
Understood. Oh, what an amazing opportunity to have repeated experiments in microgravity for up to 3 minutes. You know, this is incredible. God, the space industry is going in some interesting directions, isn't it? This is so fascinating. I'm so sorry that we're out of time. I have 100 more questions to ask you. But Dave Mackay, thank you so much for joining us. This has been so interesting. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.